So I think a lot of times music producers don't really know what synth one-shots are for. They might see them in a sample pack. Here I have Night Flight's a really cool lo-fi R&B pack. You can find it, link is in the description below. But essentially synth one-shots oftentimes to music producers are these things that, as you can hear, they sound basically like these hits of resonance or a note. A lot of times producers just grab them, drag and drop them into the track, put reverb or delay on them, and treat them like synth hits that they put in with the drums or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's actually intended is for you to trigger them using your MIDI keyboard. It's essentially like an audio preset. So instead of synth presets on a VST, you have synth one-shots you trigger in your DAW. In Ableton, we use Simpler. So here I'll just go over to my instruments, grab Simpler, drag and drop it in, and then grab that sound and put it in. Maybe we'll grab this one right here. So now I have something that I can play. I'm just hitting the MIDI keyboard underneath my desk. So what that's doing now is it's hitting the sound in different spots. You'll notice there's a few things you want to keep in mind when you do this technique. One of them, as I go up the keyboard in pitch, the length of the sample is shortening. The opposite happens when I go lower in pitch. It takes a long time to get through that sample. So what I want to do is warp it. In Logic, they call this flex mode. There's also an option FL in the drop-down menu in the top right in the sampler module. I go to Warp Complex in Ableton to get the best sound I want. And then I might do some other things like increase the release in the ADSR. This way, when I hit the keyboard, it's actually not cutting the sound out like it was before. Now, when I just hit the keys, very naturally, the sound rings out through that sample. So I can play much more naturally on the keyboard. Again, very obvious stuff I know, but kind of overlooked when you're trying to get into this style of making sounds. And then the control section in Simpler is also kind of overlooked. I like to make a lot of lo-fi sounds, so I might go in, use the EQ. Makes things darker and, well, older sounding. Not that you have to go for that sound, but sometimes you want to temper those high frequencies, and a lot of sounds might sound cooler if you make them darker. Also, you have an LFO here. I might just add a little bit of this, and it's going to give it that, just a touch of pitch modulation. Obviously, I turn this all the way up. It's going to sound very, weird or funky. So by just adding a little bit of it, it kind of makes it sound like it's going through a cassette tape, right? And then you can also mess around with pan. Sometimes I just jack this all the way up in Simpler because, especially if you're wearing headphones, you'll hear it's got almost that Leslie-esque movement. It's moving from side to side. And of course, you can increase the rate of that LFO to make it even more interesting sounding. So the LFO is really cool. You got the EQ right there. You're now playing something using audio. And one of the things I like to do is use the instrument rack in Ableton Live. Just like I've done a tutorial on parallel processing with plugins, you could do the same thing parallel processing with instrumentation. The instrument rack in Ableton is designed just for this. Drag and drop it in, open up the lanes, and I can just bring this thing over to it, drop it right in, and now I can have parallel lanes of other synth one-shots. It's a pretty amazing technique once you start to realize you could just combine things. Like for instance, let's grab this one here, kind of a cool piano one-shot I created, and do the same thing. Turn on the warp, make sure it's complex to avoid artifacts, turn up the release so I can hear all the sample when I trigger it, and maybe just use the volume faders here to get the balance mixing the two sounds together, and you get a unique transient, something that people just can't easily copy. You can come up with all kinds of unique ideas playing them on your keyboard, right? Notice how I have parallel lanes. You can attach different kinds of effects to those other lanes, or you could just grab other samples that have different transient shapes. So what do I mean by that? If I go in here and grab yet another one shot, maybe hear this kind of cleaner piano sound, trails, drag and drop it in, and if I open it up in Ableton, I can just as easily reverse that sample and bring this into my instrument just by dropping it in. It immediately creates an instance of sampler. And if I turn up my release And I'll turn on warp, complex, make sure this is all the way up, and maybe shorten it so that this triggers very consistently after the initial transients of the other one shots. And something I've noticed from doing this technique is different kinds of instrument sources give you a different feel when you're filling it in. Like a piano, when you reverse it in this way, it almost sounds like you're putting a horn section behind your keyboard sound. It's kind of amazing. And then what I like to do is throw an effect on that. So I'll go in, grab the vintage verb, and put it on just that lane. So notice I'm not dragging it after the instrument rack, I'm putting it after that one particular instance of simpler. So now I have this spacier version of the reverse sample in the mix. Just adds all this depth because it's two different styles of transients, right? One, there's an immediate sound, then decay, the other, reverse. And another kind of unique thing you can do with this, being really creative with the sounds you're using, is actually take percussion samples or drum samples and put that in a parallel lane in the keyboard sound to create sort of, well, you create a transient or you could create like a texture that goes along with what you're playing. I'll show you what I mean. I can go into the same exact sample pack. This is Night Flights. Again, you can find this in the description below. Really cool lo-fi R&B style pack. Very unique sounds in here. And go into the rim shots. Here's a rim shot right here. If I bring this into the sound, it's just adding this really cool transient pop to the sound that I'm playing, right? Which doesn't really seem like it makes a lot of sense. But if I decide to do this, and again, you can see I'm using the ADSR just like all the others. Now you can use this to create a texture. And what I do is add a delay to this sound. So right here, I'm just adding in a delay plugin. And because I've added it in this way, I've created this cool textural element to what I'm playing. And that can be a really nice effect. It's almost like you're adding kind of ghost notes to what you're playing. So you can obviously take these techniques and just totally run with them in any way you can think of. And again, we simply went from taking something as simple as a sound like this that producers might not even know what to do with. They might just be drag and dropping them into their session and thinking, what can I do with this? And we've turned that sound into this instrument. So I hope you guys found this video useful for your music productions. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. It really does a lot to support the channel, help it grow. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.